Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome back to another PS4 and PS5 Jailbreak news update. We've had lots of topics that have been building up over the past week to troll through, so let's go ahead and get straight into it, shall we? So starting with, of course, the Lapse exploit, Chameleon's version for 9.00. We had a pretty big stability improvement, so performance fix here that was added a few days ago, and now this has made a huge difference to the stability when loading the exploit on the browser on 9.00 on your PS4. So when I go to load it, it should basically eliminate or at least greatly reduce the amount of unhandled rejection errors that we used to get when loading the exploit, which would happen quite frequently. I haven't had a single one. I tested it running it 3 times in a row, and each time it loaded the exploit successfully. Not only that, but it now runs the exploit a lot faster, so you're not waiting as long for it to actually, finish running the kernel exploit and then load etaHEN. It now happens much, much faster. So a big improvement to speed and reliability on the exploit. So that is a huge improvement that's been made there as well. Now again, it's still not recommended really to use this yet because it still has the issue of certain games having black screen problems and some save data corruption issues. So still not recommended to use this overall until that is fully fixed. But as soon as that's fixed, this would be the go-to option now, given how fast it runs. And again, not requiring any additional devices like another device to send the exploit or using a USB drive like the previous methods. Now it is only for 9.00 right now, but Chameleon has stated the intention to update it to higher firmwares, to start getting firmwares like 9.03 and 9.60 updated to use this. Given how much more stable and fast it now runs, it can now kind of be ported to these higher firmwares. Now, not only is Chameleon working on that, but we also have etaHEN, who appears to be working on this too, because etaHEN's repo has also been updated. This also uses the web browser to run the exploit here. And you can see here it's now been updated. Originally, it was only 8.00 to, I think, 8.03 that was supported. Now it supports firmwares from 8.00 all the way up to 9.60, at least with the initial ROP. Still not in a usable state yet, but as you can see, it is being ported to support firmwares all the way up to 9.60, so that you'll be able to jailbreak just using the web browser with no additional devices up to 9.60 fairly soon. Now, in addition to that, we also now finally have the implementation of the Lapse exploit using the Lua exploit to load it, which again uses these Artemis engine games with a modified save file that can be used to trigger the exploit. So we now actually have an implementation and it works on the PS4 and the PS5 here. So if we take a look at the payload section and then scroll down, of course, to the information here, and you can see we've got lapse.lua, kernel exploit for PS5 for firmware below or equal to 10.01, and PS4 below or equal to 12.02. It says on the PS5, it will jailbreak the game process as well as the PlayStation, allowing for more access to the system, and on the PS4, it will only give arbitrary kernel read-write for the vulnerable firmware. Jailbreaking for PS4 is not yet available. So on the PS5, it has a post-exploitation step that does things like enable the debug settings. That doesn't happen on the PS4, but on the PS4, it's mostly done. It actually runs the exploit just fine, but it doesn't do anything for the post-exploitation step at the moment. So basically, you need to have one of the games that uses the Artemis engine, like Hamadashi Creative here. When I load up the game with the modified save file on it for the remote Lua loader, it will go up and load the userland exploit. We can then use the payload, the send Lua Python file using Python by opening up a command window, of course, in the directory with the payloads. And then we can just use Python, then the send lua.py file, then the IP address of the PS4 with the port number being 9026. And then we can just enter the Lua file that we want to send to the console to execute, which is going to be our Lapse kernel exploit. And then we can send it and it will start executing the exploit there on the PS4. And that should work all the way up to 12.02. Not to mention, we also have etaHEN VTX from EchoStretch that is also ported up to 12.02. So we're getting very close to being able to essentially jailbreak the PS4 all the way up to 12.02. We're essentially just missing the kind of final post-exploitation steps like the bin loader, which will allow us to load the etaHEN VTX payload. And then eventually, of course, we'll need to wait for etaHEN to get ported, which will take longer, which will give us all of the additional extra features that etaHEN includes. But until that time, we can use etaHEN VTX from EchoStretch, which of course allows us to at least enable fake packages and essentially get the console jailbroken. So we're getting very close to being able to jailbreak the PS4 all the way up to 12.02 using the Lua exploit and up to 9.60 using the web browser method. Now, I know a lot of people do not want to have to, get these Lua games. If we head, of course, back to the remote Lua loader here, we'll be able to see that we do have all the games that are currently supported, from Raspberry Cube all the way up to Jinky Resurrection. There's also the etaHEN demo that's been recently added, but obviously you'll need to get the full version of the game, a disc version of the game, in order to be able to load it on older firmwares. So that is basically it. You need to get one of these games. Now, speaking of the games, there are other games that are getting added here. So Master S9 has shown off another game that appears to have been ported. So Fuyu Kiss CUSA 29745. So you can see this game here also uses the Artemis engine, and it can be used again to load the exploit on the console. As you can see, loads the save file, and then we get the remote Lua loader running. So that's another game that's also potentially working. Another game that's also being looked at the moment is this Winter Guest game as well. This one has some kind of different structure to the save file, but it is a compatible game, so it will likely get ported over hopefully fairly soon. So we could potentially see this game, and obviously this game here, be added to the Lua loader so that you could get one of those games as well as the ones I showed in the earlier list. You can pretty much try and get them from places like eBay or CD Japan or Play Asia. The only thing is, a lot of people who are kind of reselling them on eBay are selling them at scalper prices at this point. The secret's out that these games can be used to trigger an exploit and jailbreak your console, so obviously they're being sold at inflated prices, unfortunately. But maybe because this game's just been added, you might be able to find one of these at a reasonable price, or maybe one of these at a reasonable price for when it hopefully gets ported in the near future. So those are some updates there as well. Now for the PS5, we recently got the new firmware update of 11.40. All it says is that they've improved messages and usability on some screens. Apparently they've also fixed a VRR stutter issue according to Digital Foundry in this particular version. But yeah, no mention of any kind of security fixes in this version, and the Lua exploit appears to still work up to firmware 11.40. So if you don't really use your PS5 that often and you're thinking of maybe jailbreaking it in the future, and you're on the latest firmware like 11.40, then you could essentially just create a Japanese account and then get one of the demos like the Hamadashi Creative demo or the etaHEN demo. Basically get one of these demos from the PSN store onto your PS5 and then put it offline, or your PS4, and then put it offline and keep it offline until a new kernel exploit comes out for one of those newer firmwares, and then you'll be able to use that demo to load the exploit. So next we also have an update to the backup files from Master S9. So Master S9's released a new backup that now includes the two versions of the Lua exploit. There's the remote Lua loader, RLL, and then there's the etaPLK version. The etaPLK version is used to automatically load the full chain exploit on consoles that already have the full jailbreak available up to 7.61, so that you can use it to auto-load things like etaHEN just by launching the game. So that is what that version is. And then the RLL, the remote Lua loader, is the version that we just talked about before, where you can send different Lua files to the console to execute for testing the new Lapse exploit. And the way it works is it just has the saves on two different accounts. So you can sign into one account to use the remote Lua loader version and sign into the other account to use the etaPLK version. And then you just load your Lua game and it should run that particular version of the exploit. So that's all set up and ready, but this only works on firmwares 5.10 up to 10.01 because the backup was created on 5.10. So you need a console 5.10 or higher to be able to restore that backup onto it to be able to access those save files. So I'll leave a link to that backup down in the video description. So now 8.x firmwares, 9.x firmwares, 10.0 and 10.01 can all essentially run the new kernel exploit on the PS5. And not only that, but there was an issue previously with the ELF loader not working above certain firmwares like 8.0 or 8.20. That issue appears to have been resolved. So it's now working up to all the way up to, I believe, 10.01, or at least the offsets and everything have been ported for it. So it looks like that fix has been applied. So we should now be able to use the ELF loader on higher firmwares. And as an additional bonus, we now have the payloads being ported as well. So we've got on the PS5 payload dev repo, the web server payload has also been updated. So it now includes offsets for 8.x, 9.x and 10.x, which means you can run the homebrew loader on those firmwares and essentially load a bunch of things like the retro games and the offline account activator and the remote play enabler, and all of those things can now be loaded on those firmwares. So again, no K stuff yet, or obviously etaHEN, but in the meantime, you can at least get some homebrew applications and payloads running on 8.x, 9.x, and 10.x, which is pretty great. That includes things like the kernel log server and the FTP server, which should hopefully be able to run now on 8.x, 9.x, and 10.0x firmwares. So we also got some information about PS5 Slims from LukeD_NC, who said that PS5 Slims on 8.20 firmware with a factory paired Blu-ray drive and no PSN activation or account can be restored using Master S9's system image without losing drive pairing, and then Lua launched using the IX-SHE. So essentially the worry with PS5 Slims is that the older model Slims that first came out did not have the disk drive paired from the factory, so you'd have to update to the latest firmware in order to pair the drive, and of course that would prevent you from running the exploit on older firmwares. However, newer model PS5 Slims that are on 8.0 or above have the disk drive already paired from the factory, so that you don't have to update to pair the drive and get it working. So you can use it to run your Lua game and run the exploit. The worry was when you restore a backup, because restoring a backup is similar to essentially factory resetting the console. And so the worry was restoring a backup to get the modified save file on there to load the exploit might actually remove the pairing on the drive, and then you'd have to update to the latest firmware to pair the disk drive again. Luckily, that is not the case. LukeD_NC took one for the team and tested this on a factory paired Blu-ray drive console and found that it does not actually remove the drive pairing when you essentially restore the backup. So that basically means Disc Edition Slims on 8.0 or above are a viable option for running the jailbreak once we have KStuff for etaHEN v2 on 8.00 and above. We've also got some information about new games coming. So of course, Zeko has been teasing the new etaHEN v2 method, showing a game like Spider-Man 2 running on a test kit, but at the moment this is a debug package on a test kit, but basically showing what can potentially come to retail consoles eventually with this etaHEN v2 method, because currently Spider-Man 2 is one of those games that cannot be turned into a working dump using the current methods we're using with KStuff, but with this new etaHEN v2 method, which should allow for fake packages in the future, something like this should be possible running games like Spider-Man 2 and other games that are not working with the KStuff method. So Zeko just basically showing a little teaser of that as well, running on a test kit. We also have some new PS5 game backups, which require higher firmwares than 7.61 to dump, because we now have, of course, the PS5 self-decryptor that has been successfully ported to higher firmwares like 8.x, 9.x, and 10.x, so people can start dumping those games and turning them into working backups. And then some of those backups might run on firmwares like 7.x, might be new enough to run some of those backups. So it looks like we have from Speed-007, Alone in the Dark, Dragon's Dogma 2, and Pacific Drive. So those games are games that require a firmware higher than 7.61 to run, so they couldn't be dumped previously, but now that we have the self-decryptor working on higher firmwares, people on 8.x, 9.x, and 10.0x can dump those games, and then we can essentially try and run those game dumps on 6.x and 7.x, and some of them might work. It looks like Alone in the Dark, Dragon's Dogma 2, and Pacific Drive may work on 7.x firmwares. So the last thing to show for the PS5 here is that Lightning Mods has shown an additional option that is coming to etaHEN. So this is the controller shortcuts feature, and you can see it here, showing that there are certain controller shortcuts that you can enable to do things like open the cheats menu, open the etaHEN toolbox, open the Webman Games menu, as well as toggle KStuff on and off. And then you can also remap the share button as well. So yeah, just pretty handy, kind of like how in etaHEN you have the shortcut to bring up the cheats menu when you're in game. Well, these shortcuts can trigger at any point. You don't have to be in the game. You can trigger it when you're on the menu. And this is just going to make things so much more convenient to use your jailbroken PS5, because you don't have to go digging around in the settings to enable certain things. You'll be able to just hold down certain buttons on your controller and it will take you straight to that option, which is a huge welcome change for etaHEN, which I think is going to make a real difference. So anyway, that is basically the whole update here for this video. So hope you guys enjoyed this one or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.